Okay, well, anyway, the Supreme Court takes the case, and they're going to rule that it violates the Constitution in two ways. One is that it violates what's called the Presentment Clause. And the Presentment Clause says that a law that the president signs, for a bill to become a law, the president has to sign it into law. And so the bill is presented to Congress. And therefore, the bill that the president did sign into law, which delegated this power to the INS, is now different than the law that Congress understands, or at least the House understands that it gave to the president. So it violates the Presentment Clause. And secondly, it violates the bicameralism requirement. You know, for a law to be a law, it has to pass in the House, and then pass in the Senate, or pass in the Senate, and pass in the House, or pass simultaneously. Whatever the case, it's got to go through both chambers, and therefore it's also unconstitutional because, remember, this was a simple resolution, not one that passed through the House and the Senate. But I'll tell you that you could have a legislative veto that could be passed by the House and the Senate, and this too would be violated, or would be a violation of the Constitution, at least according to the Supreme Court, or at least according to the Supreme Court in 1983. Because I tell you, a lot of people believe, a lot of jurists, not a lot, but a number of jurists believe that perhaps a legislative veto is something that Congress should have been able to keep. And in fact, something akin to a legislative veto still exists. It's much more informal now, obviously. So that's a simple resolution and a long talk, which you should know about what a legislative veto is. So that's good. Now we come to a concurrent resolution, and this one is a resolution that's passed by the House and the Senate. And concurrent resolutions are primarily used to come up with rules that are going to govern the House and the Senate together. So this would be rules that govern the branch of the legislative branch. Another thing that they're used is to approve or disapprove of something that the president has done, so condemn or applaud him. It could also be used to welcome foreign dignitaries to the United States, or make some sort of joint statement by Congress. They're not laws. Neither of these are laws, although legislative veto bordered on kind of really being a law. So that's a concurrent resolution. Not terribly interesting. I had some examples, but we need to move on. That's not very interesting. Let's go on to a joint resolution. A joint resolution is essentially, this is a resolution that's passed by the House and the Senate. The president signs joint resolutions, or he's supposed to sign them. He at least has to veto them if he doesn't want to sign them. And so it's very similar to a bill. They're much more likely to be for very specific things. Maybe a continuing resolution. We've gone some time, years, without a budget here in the United States, so there'll be a joint resolution, just sort of a continuing resolution to keep the budget as it was last year, or some modest modifications, things like that. So they're usually very specific things. They are used to declare war. If the United States, if we ever get around to declaring war again, this would be what they would use a joint resolution for. They are used in foreign affairs. Perhaps one of the most important uses of a joint resolution was the Tonkin Gulf Resolution, which you may have learned in some of your, I guess, in your international politics classes. This was back in 1964. There was allegations that are substantiated in August 2nd that there was a firefight between the USS Maddox and three North Vietnamese torpedo boats, smaller ships, I think, and they were fired on by the USS Maddox. And then on August 4th, they came back again, and the USS Maddox claims they were fired upon. They got in another fight. And this was sent back, and the United States found out about it, and our Congress passed what's called the Tonkin Gulf Resolution in 1964, which basically gave a blank check to the president to conduct military operations in Southeast Asia in defense of American interest over there. And what happened was it was discovered, I think, by 1970, it became clear that there was, that at least in the second firefighter encounter between, that there really wasn't a second encounter. This was not really true at all. In fact, Lyndon Johnson has said, for all I know, they were shooting at whales out there. So he even didn't believe it. So, and as you probably know, the Vietnam War was not going well by 1970, and so we get in 1973 the War Powers Resolution, another joint resolution. This was sent to Nixon, who vetoed it, and Congress is going to override his veto with a 2/3 vote. And so we get the War Powers Resolution. We know that presidents, Republican and Democratic alike, don't believe this is the case. Sorry. Just looking over here, just keep it moving around. Who was that? People look like little kids in Navy dress uniforms. But so there's a joint that's what an example of a joint resolution's use in foreign affairs. They are used, joint resolutions are used to propose amendments to the Constitution. So we've got 27 amendments to the Constitution, and all of these have come about as a result of a joint resolution where 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate propose an amendment to the Constitution where it's sent back to the states, in which 3/4 of the state legislatures, 3/4 of a special convention drawn up by the states, pass the amendment, or ratify the amendment is the phrase, is the right way to express that. It's also been used to, at least on 2 occasions, to circumvent the 2/3 requirement in the Senate to sign a treaty. And the 2 examples deal with 2 states, Hawaii and Texas. And there was a joint resolution to admit Texas into the Union in 1845, something like that. And Texas was an independent country then. And so technically this would have required a treaty, since this was an international agreement, U.S. and Republic of Texas. And same in 1959, when Hawaii was admitted to the country. There was the Republic of Hawaii, it was a kingdom actually, and the Kingdom of Hawaii, and Hawaii came to be part of the United States through a joint resolution which was signed by the president. They didn't go through this treaty, treaty process, which perhaps they may have needed to do. Hawaii, there's actually some people in Hawaii who want independence, and they point back to this sort of unlawful use of a joint resolution to admit their state. So that is a joint resolution. I've really kind of touched on these. Just see if I left anything out there. Joint resolution. All right. So there's that. I'm going to pause it here before we go to our next slide. All right, how many minutes was that?